should lullaby.
Living the Dreamboat has officially come out, concluding this Loie and Bobby breakup arc, and it wasn't the worst thing that I've seen when it comes to what this show has to offer, but I didn't want to spoil anyone else's hopes, but I really knew that Loie and Bobby would come back together, but it doesn't change the fact that this episode is a showcase of what makes this entire breakup arc really underwhelming. With the 4 episodes releasing involving this arc, each episode was a little too difficult for me to take into consideration, and the fact that the execution really shows that when you have a relationship that was set up, well, not really set up, but been an item since the very beginning of the show, and you can't be able to do anything interesting almost 10 years later, then it really made me see that Nickelodeon, while this isn't the worst ratings trap, it just goes to show that they are attempting to get everyone else's attention and yet still making them underwhelmed. These 4 episodes, Cupid's Harrow, Man of My Schemes, Bean Dreams, and Living the Dreamboat, would have been something more if Loie wasn't the only one getting the focus, while Bobby ends up getting the focus at the final episodes, and yet nothing new whatsoever, to the point that it makes his appearance in T-Dove way more better. Let's just get this out of the way. I'm a Loie and Bobby shipper, and while these episodes didn't change my mind on done being a shipper, it doesn't change the fact that these episodes would have done much more better if they actually included more episodes and actually give more focus to Bobby's character while write Loie much more better, because nearly all these episodes is a showcase of how much that they clearly don't even know how to handle Loie's character, and it just makes me think, what is the point of her going to golf and then come back and just think about her life choices, because it makes me convinced that she's in the same predicament as Bobby, just not as bad as Bobby. And while I did rethink my opinions after watching these episodes, it doesn't change the fact that all this is really the most underwhelming arcs, which goes to show that Nickelodeon isn't even trying. So let's go begin this Loie and Bobby breakup quadrilogy. If you say that Q word isn't a word, well, I'm including 4 episodes, so this isn't the first time I used that word. With Cupid's Harrow, which this is where Loie and Bobby are rethinking their choices on breaking up, since that Bobby is going to be going to Mexico, not really moving there, but going there in order to take a job there. And this leads to a scenario where Lenny and Miguel are doing the Cupid Cuties podcast, and they mixed up the whole voices involving Loie and Bobby, and this leads to them accidentally breaking them up, and they need to do everything in their will to keep them together. This episode seems like the type of material, well, your siblings caused something which in actuality it really wasn't their doing, when in reality they are just trying to figure out what their next step is, specifically Loie and Bobby. But this leads to our biggest problem with the episode, and this arc in general. This whole breakup thing between Loie and Bobby when they're not really into the relationship that much like they used to feels out of nowhere, to the point that their last episode from season 9 where they're taking care of a kitty, it really feels like they're more close when it comes to taking care of their kid, and then once we get into this, they instantly forgot about that. And it really makes me convinced that with how they're setting up the idea of Lenny and Miguel breaking up Loie and Bobby, really feels like though that Nickelodeon is attempting to get attention by the story description of this episode and just instantly doing the thing of fooling us with the ratings trap. Like I said, this isn't the worst ratings trap that they've done, but more on that later. Let's get into Bobby because this is the only episode out in the entire arc aside from Living the Dreamboat where he gets development. He is getting a job at Mexico similar to Mikado at Great Lake City. And if the Quadrilogy spin-off still continued to this day, we would have actually seen episodes of that. But this really makes me convinced that they're attempting to make Bobby confident on being single, but it really goes to show that he has a difficult time moving forward. It's not to mention the fact that he probably won't be able to succeed life on his own, which I would feel bad for him, but that just goes to show that they should have written Bobby's character more better. When it comes to Miguel's character in this is most likely the only time we're ever going to see Miguel and Bobby interact with each other, and with the situations that Miguel got himself into with him and Lori separately, I'm really convinced that I would side with him, but on the other hand, with him not understanding of what Lori and Bobby are going through, it's one thing to not get all the answers, but it just goes to show that with how hyper-focused Miguel is when it comes to the whole Lori and Bobby breaking up, it's difficult for me to see Lenny in the wrong when it comes to her not understanding Miguel's points when it comes to telling her that that's Bobby and that's Lori, because really, if I'm growing accustomed to Lenny's stupidity and yet focusing on Miguel's character, how the heck is he not in the final episode along with Lenny to resolve the situation? Granted, Living the Dreamboat does have this explanation on having another character do that, but it really makes me see Miguel as afterthoughts, including Lenny, including the following episode that she also appears and have a role in. If anything, the fact that Lenny and Lori don't get much screen time in this arc when it comes to the following two episodes, Being Dreams and Living the Dreamboat, it really makes it odd to see that Lori is going through all of this, and yet at the same time, Lenny is mostly responsible with this whole situation. Granted, I say mostly because it's mainly Lori and Bobby's terms on breaking up, but it makes her presence in this and the following episode really pointless. Terrell, Lori and Bobby needs more focus, yeah, but at the same time, the fact that Lenny is Lori's closest sister, I'm really having a difficult time understanding the motivations of Lenny into romance. And when it comes to a podcast, honestly, how am I supposed to believe that she manages to get two people together? Because if no one is telling her the truth in a nicer way, then I don't even understand how she would take it so harshly from those people who just giving her proper critiques. Like, they're making this episode to showcase the background of Lori and Bobby privately, which is something that relationships do. But on the other hand, I'm honestly having a difficult time seeing the point of view of Lenny and Miguel when they mostly get dropped in the following episodes. Terrell, this isn't on the same levels as Lincoln breaking Lori and Bobby and Save the Date, but more on that later. But it just sums up a lot that they clearly don't even know how to make an actual breakup work without giving execution to Lori and Bobby. Yes, the following episodes will showcase Lori's independence, but with how problematic those episodes were, it's hard to easily side with Lori when it comes to her choices when it just comes out of the blue. When you put into the point of view on Lenny and Miguel, At times, it's difficult to admit that they're responsible, since that it wasn't really their intentions on having Lori and Bobby break up, since it was a misunderstanding, but with how disfocused these characters are with each other, a lot of disfocusing is happening in the following episodes, including the final episode. With that being said, I'm giving Cupid's Harrow a 5 out of 10, and as we enter the following episode, Man of My Scams, it really gives me the impression that Lori can't be paired with anyone other than Bobby, but at the same time, this showcases Lori at her worst. You see, Lori sees a picture of Bobby being with another girl, and presumably, she's his new girlfriend, and this puts Lori into massive depression while Lenny attempts to help her by being paired with another guy. I will say this though, this episode kind of would have worked for Lori's character on finding another guy, and I will admit that something like this would have happened way earlier in the show. But this episode, regardless of better late than never, is still terribly executed when it comes to Lori's character. Like, if I reviewed this episode only, this would have been Cartoon Crisis material. If anyone is going to bring up Lori's insecurities, at this point after going to college, coming back from college, living a different life in the Royal Woods, she really feels like she's still in high school. And not in a good way. Because at this point, the fact that this whole thing was a misunderstanding yet again, which we're gonna get to later, it just makes me see that Lori, regardless if she can handle her life on her own, these episodes are just showcasing that she really isn't. I mean, she does have other hobbies rather than working at a job that Luann is working, but every time I look at Lori in this and just thinking that she needs a boyfriend because Bobby has moved on, at this point, what is the point of being superior on making your insecurities better? Because getting your insecurities out of the way is honestly what makes you better, and at this point, the fact that Lori never has that in these episodes really makes it difficult for me to root for her, and we haven't even got to the worst part. She tries to make it look like that Parag is her boyfriend on social media. Nothing more. The fact that she's willing to go the lengths of making it look like the Parag is her boyfriend, and the fact that Parag is oblivious, and even though he may be confused on what is going on, doesn't change the fact that he's in a relationship that showcases of how much that Lori has been taken off the hook too easily in this, to where that if this person was in a relationship forever, and yet he is still unaware of what Lori is doing, things would have been more uglier, but this show wouldn't even allow the females like Lori to get bigger consequences. If you expect me to believe that Lori desperately needs to move forward, well, she's moving forward too fast and doing it the really wrong way by making it feel like that she already has a boyfriend, which would have worked better in the earlier seasons when she was selfish and rude towards her siblings. So at this point, I'm not even convinced that if anyone would follow the ideal that Lori is already into a relationship, then how the heck is Lori not super popular when it comes to people online? Especially getting attention from boys who desperately wants to be with her. Granted, Lenny attempted to help Lori out with that, but apparently that didn't work out since none of the boys Lori is into. Lori has only been into one romantic relationship, and I would give her the benefit of the doubt of trying out a different relationship. But the fact that she's only doing this for her social media status and not really doing it legitimately, then it convinces me that she is only matched for Bobby, but it doesn't make her a good character. For Parag, I really feel bad for him. Even though that he is sadly a tool for Loey, it doesn't change the fact that he doesn't deserve any of this. The fact that Loey just didn't think clearly that someone else would have been in a different relationship, as in with a different goal that is brand new, then as far as I'm concerned, Loey really doesn't really have a knowledge of what it's like on being in a relationship, despite the fact that she's been in a relationship with Bobby for a long time. And if she was into different relationships in an alternative universe like Lenny, and she was smarter than Lenny, and yet they still botch her character up, this moment would have been more worse. You can imagine of what Loey's character would have been more selfish than how she was in the beginning, because if she dumped multiple guys and it's mainly on her own terms on being that selfish like she was from the first season, and she's only using one guy to her advantage on social media, then I'm really more surprised that her parents isn't teaching her a lesson when it comes to romantic relationships, because at this point, you can't convince me that Loey would be better off if she was with someone in that type of alternative universe. Like, how am I supposed to take her breakup with Bobby seriously when they're trying to be mature enough, and yet at this point, Loey isn't even attempting to be mature to think about her own choices or thinking something in a different way. And the fact that this show has the characters do that numerous of times, they're really hurting Loey's character on being independent, and it makes me think, yep, there's really no point of her going to college while living in a different house, because episodes like this just sums up a lot that she can't be able to move out of the Loud house, even though that the show specifically states that she should, since that she's becoming an adult and graduated from high school. The more I question this, the more I realize what is the point of moving forward in life in this show. That highly applies to Loey, because this screenshot, while it's justifiable to Loey since that she needs to see the pic online for herself, it only takes us back from the beginning, and regardless of its classic ways, it's not done in a good way, because it just sums up that this show isn't even moving forward even after making choices of having Loey going to college. And you wanna know what makes this episode really stupid? When Loey resolves the Parag and girlfriend situation, she found a cardboard cutout. Is the same woman that was with Bobby in the picture. So as it turns out, Bobby didn't have an actual girlfriend. He only took a picture so that he can get free Gatorade. The fact that Loey would have resolved this situation easily by texting Bobby on the pic itself, then she would have been more mature and she wouldn't cause a relationship to be broken up, because as far as I'm concerned, she broke up a relationship more worse than what Lincoln did between her and Bobby, and that's not an exaggeration. This just sums up a lot that they're attempting to make these episodes work by showcasing Loey's insecurities, but at this point, it's not showcasing her character traits in a positive light. Truth be told, the ship between Loey and Parag that gained some minimal attention wasn't really thought out, considering of how poorly executed this all was, and the fact that Parag is being put into an unfair position while Loey gets off scot-free, regardless of Parag's relationship with his girlfriend being brand new compared to Loey and Bobby's relationship. You really can't expect me to believe that Loey would learn from this, considering that she shrugs it off with the whole idea that it was all because of cardboard. And thinking about cardboard, it didn't make me convinced that it would fool anyone. But this episode did, but for stupid people. And that's not really a good sign when you're having cardboard as a thing against the characters, with how the episode makes them bring out the worst to, well, I'm not convinced that this whole breakup thing was really worth it. And that sums up a lot when it comes to the final episode, but we only have one episode left, and while it has nothing to do with Loie and Bobby's relationship, it still shows that they're not making Loie's character better. Hence why I'm giving this episode a 2 out of 10, and judging by the following episode, it made this episode slightly pointless of showcasing Loie's future to, well, why would you release this episode this early when you can go to the following episode? Well, it has a purpose, despite terribly executed, involving this arc itself. Because Bean Dreams is supposed to be a showcase of Loie's future other than being a golfer, but on the other hand, what we're going to be witnessing in Living the Dreamboat, they still mess up Loie's character after so long of taking care of multiple siblings that she is new to this since that she forgot everything, and yet this episode still didn't feel earned. At the Burnt Bean, Loie gets the opportunity to go to Beansylvania where she can get her diploma off of a bean college, and allows her to go to multiple places around the world, including Paris. Loie heads to elementary school to deliver coffees, and after kids run past her, she accidentally spilled coffee on Cheryl, so she has to find a different outfit while Loie takes her job. This is where she meets PD, and this is supposed to showcase that Loie is taking care of a kid and understanding the concerns of that kid in the same ways of her looking after her siblings, but this really makes it more confusing when you witness Loie's development in previous episodes when it comes to her being into golf, and if she never returned to Royal Woods due to the whole leap year, then they would have handled Loie's character slightly better if they had a similar premise of her taking care of a kid somewhere outside of Royal Woods. I'm saying this in all due respect. The dynamic between Loie and PT would have worked if we hadn't had a dynamic of her and the kitty, not the kitty from Kings of the Con, but the kitty from the season 9 episode, where she is taking good care of her. So by witnessing this, we're just repeating the lesson again, but it centers around a human kid. Let's get this out of the way. I don't hate PD in this episode. In fact, I think that his backstory really makes him sympathetic on him dealing with him being alone, which in the same ways it does have a connection with Loie skiing away from Bobby when it comes to the breakup. So regardless of Bobby's name not being mentioned in this episode is somehow important with the arc, but on the other hand, it really makes the following episode really pointless, knowing full well that it goes against Loie's character in this episode. I really want to appreciate this episode when it comes to Loie's future, which would have been a long time coming, but with this being included with a breakup arc, it just makes me feel so Loie doesn't want to do golf anymore despite having second thoughts. She doesn't want to go to a Bean University. All she wants to do is take care of kids at a playground, despite the fact that she had a difficult time doing that by taking care of her siblings from the beginning of the series. And when you take into the consideration that in GarageBand, she doesn't want to do any of that and wants to move on by moving out, despite doing it too early, this undermines that development to the point that regardless of Loie changing her mind at the end of GarageBand, well, technically middle because she misses her siblings, whenever you look at this episode and seeing how she's taken a different direction, I want to see relatability from characters like Loie, but it just doesn't work when it comes to this type of direction. Like, if she did took the job to go to college in Bean University, she'll have the chance to travel all over the world, but that also applies to her career in golf. And while she was afraid of that in driving admission, it doesn't change the fact that she is dealing with the same lesson in this, but involving coffee. Like, you can say all you want that Fairway University is really confusing and pointless and stupid when it comes to it only centering around golf, but golf is a sport, and while making coffee can be a talent, it's not really that big when it comes to playing golf, since thinking about coffee having a university or being related, then it just goes to show that if this show has multiple colleges off of one activity, is there a thing of taking care of kids of a college? Like, it may be important to keep kids safe for higher educational students, but the way I look at this logic in this show, it's not making me convinced that Lori would ditch being a golf player or basically anything closer to that talent by taking care of children. I'm sorry, but I really want to remember Lori taking care of her sibling, since that she was the third parent of the family, next to Lincoln, who is the fourth parent in the beginning of the series. But with how poorly executed this breakup is, and the fact that Lori isn't connecting the dots on Pinto's lost problems, like, it always makes me feel like that this episode is really unnecessary with this arc. But with how important this is, the fact that it's supposed to connect to the following episode of Lori getting back together with Bobby, you really want me to believe way more that they should have handle Bobby's character more if he actually gained more screen time, because this episode would have been a place involving Bobby's point of view rather than Lori's when it comes to Bobby's life in Mexico. And the fact that we actually return to the same location from the Casagantes movie in the following episode, that is honestly a huge missed opportunity in my opinion. The thing is, for an episode of Lori gaining independence should have happened in her last episode, to where that thinking about the choices that she makes when it comes to her future, the following episode just makes this episode an afterthought when it shouldn't, and they really have huge missed opportunities in order to make this episode better if they're willing to sacrifice the Bobby episode. So all I can say is that watching Lori in this episode was too difficult for me to root for her, despite the fact that this episode is her best compared to all the episodes in this arc. Every time that this episode wants to showcase Lori's future, it's one thing to attempt to see her point of view, but on the other hand, after the last episode, it's hard to feel sympathy towards her when it comes to her choices, to the point that her golf career, regardless of what people think, is honestly her best attribute on moving forward in life, which I really want to believe that there are different alternatives on having a different future, but this episode didn't do a good job at it. Truth be told, if Lori did accept the offer to go to a Bean University, she'll most likely change her mind upon entering the building when she gets the opportunity to be part of the Dreamboat. That's really how I see it if she still took the job when it comes to the opportunity, and yet something else happens and she changed her mind. Really, the opportunities that the characters are given would have been impactful if the writing wasn't this way, to the point that Nickelodeon is probably not taking the future of these characters seriously, especially when it centers around the character who's moved out of her home and then comes back, not really moved back in, and yet we get these episodes. Sitting through this episode, ignoring the 3 episodes it would have made Lori more of a lost cause when it comes to her life, which would have been better, but with this somehow being connected to these episodes, it makes me to believe that she can't be able to have a future while focusing on her future. And for the following episode, Living the Dreamboat, it really showcases of how much that it had potential on being a really good episode for the modern Loud House, but it didn't. I'm giving this episode a 5 out of 10, and we have arrived at Living the Dreamboat. This episode came out on the YouTube channel of the Loud House, and it gave me the opportunity to watch it from beginning to end. And at first, I was upset, mainly of the community post that I'm gonna mention soon. But after rewatching this episode, it's not the worst, but it's really, really underwhelming. Lori gets the opportunity to become a star for one episode on the Dreamboat while picking one man of her choosing, mainly the man of her dreams. So much for her caring about other children from her experiences of taking care of her siblings, or basically any other career that she would have taken. This gets Bobby paranoid, and instead of handling the situation on his own, which I was hoping upon getting into this episode, Lincoln gets involved. Not completely, but having Bobby get disguised in order to be one of the contestants on the show. And Ryan doesn't get involved after she told Lincoln about the situation. Now, let's get this positive out of the way. It's honestly a breath of fresh air to have Lincoln and Bobby worked together, and in a way, it actually makes them the best part of this episode, minus the shipping, since the last time they hung out was from A Fail to Remember, which was all the way back from season 1. And Lincoln, despite sabotaging one of the contestants to have Bobby be one of the contestants, he doesn't get in the way whatsoever, unlike his presence that he was forced into in Save the Date. In fact, this episode just proves to me that Lincoln sabotaging just a bit of the competition is honestly the right thing to do, but let's get to Lori and Bobby. I will say that Lori is the perfect woman to star in this role of the Dreamboat. Like, you can imagine people who've been into these types of shows would imagine Lori being in that position. However, due to the development that we've got from the last 3 episodes, you can easily get into this episode ignoring those episodes and you will have missed nothing, except you will have seen Lori's character more worse for how she was portrayed. When it comes to Bobby, with this being the only episode he gets development, he still doesn't get any development whatsoever. And unlike his portrayal in Teed Off, where he actually got more development than this, I don't even understand how he manages to succeed through everything on his own when Lori is just ignoring the fact that she is in front of Bobby in disguise, and at this point the whole disguise thing that people just do not recognize, this really pushed too far because Lori knows Bobby so much, and yet this arc acts like she doesn't know him in disguise. This is where the whole Dreamboat competition falls flat. Like, there's nothing wrong with the Dreamboat thing in this episode. In fact, that's really the main focus of trying to make an episode like this work. The issue is that with how this was developed in previous episodes, this doesn't feel earned. And with this kickstarting season 11, I'm really assuming that Nickelodeon knew that they can't be able to make this work, so they have to air the first episodes of the following season, or in the same veins of season 10 when it comes to the summer camp episodes. Like, as a Loey and Bobby shipper, I really want to enjoy this episode, with it concluding the arc of the two characters coming back together. But with how poorly executed everything was, this doesn't feel earned. And it's really not the fault of the Dreamboat itself. Like, it still does the competitions that the other Loud siblings do, specifically Lin Jr. and Luann, in order to spice up the competition for the contestants to get the approval from Loey. It would have been earned, but it wasn't. Like, the moments between Loey and Bobby, who was disguised as Germany, would have been good, and they're doing the fan service, but the fact that Loey doesn't really see Bobby that closely in disguise despite knowing him for a long time, you really can't convince me that this episode will work much more better if Germany was really on the boat rather than Bobby in disguise. And truth be told, if Bobby was moving on completely, if the story was written much more better, then this would have been an actual turning point for Loey's character, but at the same time, it still wouldn't do favors for her, but more on that later. The bonding moments between Loey and Bobby is really the connection of Loey's choice that she really wants to hang out with Bobby, which is in disguise in Germany, but when it comes to the other contestant that she grew her attention on, Jet, ends up becoming an afterthought. I'm being serious. Like, the fact that the episode showcases him being better than Bobby, and yet at the same time it's been revealed that he wants Loey to move in to his house. Honestly, if this actually happened, then Loey would have been written off the show, which would have been a more depressing way to written off her character. Like, it's pretty obvious that Bobby can't run up against Jet. But on the other hand, when you take into the consideration that Jet's character would have been more developed if we actually get to see bits of him before this episode, specifically more episodes, then this test that Bobby needs to accomplish would have been more impactful. I can't really go against a character who is better than the character we're supposed to root for. Well, he doesn't get much screen time, and his goal, while bad for Loey, is just basically his own way of life. Him saying that Loey's family is nice, there's still a lot, and it's indicating that his family is supposed to be perfect when he doesn't make mistakes, which, in a way, him and Loey aren't meant to be together, but this would have been more impactful if we actually get to see more of him to be more of a character we're gonna root against while siding with Bobby more. Like, I understand that romance shows like The Dreamboat is to have the woman not knowing the other guys, otherwise it wouldn't be fair for the other contestants. But at the same time, the fact that they attempt to make Jet a hateable character, it's honestly difficult for me to hate him with how poorly executed this arc was, to where Loey's choice of going out with him would have been something entirely if Bobby was never involved. This episode really wants to showcase Loey making her own choices, and this would have been something to conclude her arc on the entire series when it comes to picking a guy that she really wants. Unfortunately, this episode was really underwhelming due to how everything beforehand didn't let up to make this entire episode worthwhile, because at this point, it's all leading back to square one. The only difference is that it never let me see Loey as a better character due to everything that happened beforehand, and at this point, I feel like that this conclusion wasn't really worthwhile because it was rushed, like every other episode centering around this arc. let's get into not only the best character in this episode, but also the entire arc, which would have been something else if Lenny was in this position, but unfortunately, it's not. Lincoln. Like, am I being exaggerated? Yes, but sitting through all these episodes, this really made me see that if Lincoln had no involvement, Loe's life would have been miserable. And I'm not exaggerating. And same goes to Bobby. Terrell, his life would have been miserable with missing the goal of his dreams. Terrell, if he lost her forever, he might as well just stay at Mexico in order to start a new life, but unfortunately, he's really incapable of doing so. Let's get this out of the way. Lincoln didn't sabotage the competition. He did sabotage one of the contestants in order to get Bobby inside the competition, but Bobby did most of the stuff on his own in the competitions. And even though that Lincoln doesn't get a lot of screen time in this, the fact that his presence is a major factor of why Loe and Bobby are back together just goes to show that if Loe and Bobby did this on their own, his family would care less, which is really saying a lot considering that they have experiences with Loe and Bobby together in the Thanksgiving episode, and with them knowing about their relationship to a T, this feels out of character for them to witness Loe moving on, which is one thing that this is part of Loe's choice, but with how that they just instantly get into the ideal of Loe being paired with a different guy despite the fact that they all watched the Dreamboat, they would have had second thoughts on thinking of what Loe's life would have been like if she was with Bobby. And the fact that Lincoln is the only character to recognize that, even though that Wyan wants Lincoln to help Bobby, it all shows to me that they're Dreamboat fans rather than what actually happens in relationships of the Dreamboat itself. This just sums up a lot that they can't be able to think of what the alternative would have looked like if Loe never competed in this competition and stayed with Bobby if it had better lighting. And while it's one thing for them to be proud for Loe, it doesn't change the fact that they'll most likely not see Loe anytime soon if Loe stays with Jet. And the fact that I'm still not against Jet really goes to show how little of an impact all of this is. Let's just get this over with. Ignoring the out of context of this image, this just makes Loe more stupid, and yet at the same time, being furious at Lincoln, regardless of him sabotaging one of the contestants, and yet isn't even picking up the pieces that whom she's talking to is the actual Bobby. This sums up a lot that the insecurities of Loe is getting done to death, and truth be told, the fact that Lincoln is being put in this position on being mostly blamed, having Loe to think that he is pairing her with Jomi, then no. Like, you are making me convinced that Loe is thinking that Lincoln is setting her up with a different guy for his own selfish ways, which it's not the case. And the fact that Lincoln has less knowledge of Jet when it comes to his actual motivations, then Lincoln actually saved Loe's life. Bobby may handle most of the work on camera when it comes to the competitions, but regardless, if Lincoln didn't do anything, Loe's life would have been miserable, and she'll most likely regret her choice of picking Jet. Let's go back to Save the Date, which Lincoln didn't broke up Loe and Bobby intentionally, and the fact that Loe still has the mindset that Lincoln did something that in reality it isn't Honestly, this back and forth of Lincoln causing something accidentally despite his selfishness, while it isn't when it comes to him being selfless, it's annoying. Like, really, really annoying. At this point, what Lincoln did in Living the Dreamboat is really for the best because it would have ruined Loie and Bobby's lives. And the fact that he was against the pairing since the very beginning, since it's something that he and Ryan can relate towards each other. Loie probably didn't get the memo completely, even after seasons of Lincoln and Ryan spending time together. Like, at this point, even if this hasn't been brought up in this arc, it doesn't change the fact that either they're abandoning it in order to create their own breakup storyline, and yet at the same time, they're not even bothering on separating characters from the main arc, which is Lincoln, and yet when Lincoln does something right for Bobby, apparently not in the point of view of Loie, knowing full well that she's really not thinking the good of what her brother can do, which is difficult for me to see in the later seasons after season 3. Truth be told, if Ryan was by Lincoln the entire time in Living the Dreamboat, it makes me think that they're not even attempting to put Lincoln in the whites completely, because he would have been scolded while Ryan gets left off the hook. That just sums up a lot of why I hate the whole feminist thing in this show, even to this day. I wouldn't have separated Lincoln from this arc if he had no role whatsoever, and the fact that in the last Loie episodes he has no part of aside from being part of the title cards, I'm not even more convinced on the fact that if Lincoln actually broken up Loie and Bobby again, they would probably be more mad at him and not even giving him any benefit of the doubt. And the fact that Lincoln didn't do that in this arc and he actually did something good for not only for Bobby but also Loie. Loie has no respect for her brother's selflessness when it comes to him thinking for her. Like, you can't even convince me that Loie would instantly be mad at Lincoln after Lincoln explains everything to her, because the transition of Lincoln explaining the situation to Loie and then Loie coming back to Bobby, all this just feels more of an afterthought than it shouldn't, to where Loie's choices in life feel more of an afterthought than it should, and it's all because of her not thinking about her brother, which says a lot on her thoughts towards him in Save the Date almost 10 years ago. And don't even get me started on the whole hat joke. Well, people are stating that it doesn't fit Lincoln well, because at this point, this is becoming pathetic, even for his family. Not only that hat is fine on him, and the fact that he has a different outfit compared to his family, specifically his shirt, the fact that he sees something in one of the contestants more than his family, who is too blind to recognize that Bobby is in disguise, really goes to show that they haven't really learned anything from the Thanksgiving episode. And the fact that Lincoln actually learned that lesson from that episode, this is really a farce that Lincoln actually learned something and it kept with him for so long, other than the other lessons that he forgot. Just by witnessing Lincoln telling Bobby that you still love her really shows to me that he's come a long way since the beginning of the show when it comes to him understanding Loie and Bobby's relationship more than anyone. And the fact that Loie doesn't see that, while his family doesn't see that completely, really the bonding between Lincoln and Bobby works much more better than it needs to be. If anything, I wouldn't be surprised if Lincoln did crash out, he would have wanted to hang out with Bobby more while also living with him. Honestly, the fact that people actually ship these two characters, which despite the age gap, is becoming more accurate the more you think about it. And the fact that that gave me more attention than Bobby's development being cut short in this arc really says a lot. Like, without Bobby doing much in this arc and mostly Loie doing most of the development, then I can't really see Bobby being put in the wrong completely, even though that the odds against him in the competition shows, which, at this point, it's difficult to admit that being a Lincoln and Bobby shipper is problematic when moments like this makes it fully spectacular in a way. Well, Lincoln sees something in Bobby that his own sister Loie doesn't in this entire arc, which, remember towards the end of No Time to Spy, well, Loie being the only girl character to get the flowers from the married couple? Well, that's really her dream of really wanting to get married with Bobby. And the fact that they just dropped that development completely for the sake of making this arc work, Loie has less to worry about X, knowing full well that if she takes away Bobby, she would probably be worried, but they will probably do a stupid way of making Loie care less and just instantly move on, but for her poor insecurities. Can we just accept the fact that when it comes to Lincoln's selfishness and selflessness, whenever he picks selflessness, he'll still be in the same position to where everyone will probably forget about that, to where they will definitely remember the bad things that he did. They'll definitely remember Chandler from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but not Lincoln's heroism of saving their lives. And this just makes me to believe that Loie was more naughty in this entire arc when it comes to how she was portrayed, to where what she said to Lincoln about "you made us get coal." Well, apparently with stuff like this, when it comes to new material of how the characters are written, apparently they're aware that they're naughty, and yet at the same time, they know full well that Lincoln is naughty, but they want to make him look more naughty than he deserves. Truth be told, the look on Lincoln's face in his pic is basically him feeling nervous, despite the fact that he basically saved the lives of two families, despite having no part of the Dreamboat competition other than sabotaging one of the contestants. But I can guarantee you, nobody would even care, despite the fact that that's basically part of his character. And yet at the same time, it's still not getting the attention from his family, or even the Casagrande. Do you see how annoyed people are when it comes to them complaining about the family message in this show? Because none of it is owned in the later seasons in comparison to the earlier seasons, and using that is becoming more of a shield rather than a positive. All I can say is, this episode still managed to give me Lincoln and Girl Jordan inspiration by doing a 5th fanfic of them, and Loie's gonna be one of the main characters. Because in all honesty, there's really no bonding between Lincoln and Loie after thinking more about this. Being negative is too much for you guys, but this really makes it difficult for me to look at the positives. Hence why it's harder for me to get on board in these episodes for how they're written. Well, that's the Loie and Bobby breakup arc, and it's underwhelming, and you would miss nothing from these episodes, but if you're interested, no problem whatsoever. But I really had nothing to gain from these episodes, other than this being another one of Nickelodeon's ratings traps, which, to be fair, despite my criticisms, this didn't tick me off more compared to the other ratings traps that Nickelodeon did in the past. The Lincoln bit in the final episode, yes, but on the other hand, I was being more prepared, unlike other people who didn't found this arc predictable before these episodes came out. So, in a way, this is probably one of the most harmless things that I would sit through from this show, more than Naughty or Nice, if I'm going to marathon these 4 episodes. But I would rather prefer the other Loud House episodes, even centering around Lori and Bobby, since that they know how to handle their dynamic and romance much more better. If anything, this should have been really important with them tackling a couple that's been a major factor since the very beginning, since it led to the Quadrilogy's introduction. But now, this image of the Loud family and the Quadrilogy coming together because of the reunion of Lori and Bobby that Lincoln explained, it wasn't earned. Like, bits and pieces in Living the Dreamboat, characters were watching the show, and we don't even get to see the Quadrilogy watching the Dreamboat, including Ronnie Ann. Like, the fact that they think that including these characters towards the end will be worthwhile, which in some cases Bobby's dad, when it comes to the season 6 episode, it didn't really impact them to well. In the Thanksgiving episode, they were so involved to well, the only 2 options that they can give is be extremely participated in a situation while completely turned off from it, and nowhere in between. Really, if they're really concerned, they wouldn't have the same reaction as everyone on the planet on Gapsing when they saw Lori picking Bobby. Like, this gag is supposed to be funny when it comes to people all over the world watching the Dreamboat, but with how this episode did poorly on the concept, I'm sorry, but this falls flat as much as one of Lucy's eyes being revealed. So, to bring up my romance and shipping video, the pairing of Lori and Bobby will be the first to discuss in that video, before everything else afterwards. And me looking into the episodes before this arc, it's mostly going to be positive and what I feel about the pairing itself. Because in this episode, while it's not written too terribly, it still makes me think that this would have been much more better, and it didn't really do favors of this pairing whatsoever. No kissing moments like in T-Dolph, but at the same time, no wedding ring that Bobby will propose to Lori, and I can guarantee you that some people were thinking about it before heading into this episode. The romance and shipping video is taking a while after you guys vote for it back in December, but I promise you, it'll be worthwhile. I just didn't want to stress myself into making that video while putting my attention away from this arc. With that being said, I'm giving Living the Dreamboat a 4.25 out of 10, while this entire arc gets a 4.5 out of 10. The romance between Bobby and Lori would have been something spectacular in this arc, but all it showed to me is Lincoln is best Cupid. It's no longer an exaggeration that my biggest fear when the title cards of Cupid's Harrow came out, he'll be involved, which is an exaggeration from the title cards themselves, since that he is nearly in all of them, but now that he is part of this arc, he's officially best Cupid. The fact that they made him a terrible character in a live-action show shows a lot that I'm more afraid that they're going to botch his character up from his development in Living the Dreamboat, but I'm gonna be saving the details of his section in the romance and shipping video because he has the longest section compared to the other sections. And at this point, him being a ladies' man has aged much more better than what people say otherwise.
start of life for me.